Hello, this is Julie Murphy with Arizona Farm Bureau, and we're doing Talk to a Farmer, but we're doing it on Thursday for a lot of important and good reasons. Tomorrow is Good Friday, so we need to be doing this on Thursday anyway, but we're continuing the series, The Future of Arizona Agriculture, and in this series, we'll end up being an 8-part series, and I think this is the 6th or 7th interview with Mark Killian. And for introduction's sake, Mark Killian is a former director of the Arizona Department of Agriculture, but perhaps more importantly, you're an agribusinessman, you're a rancher, you're a farmer, and Mark happens to be the 4th generation of farming here in the state of Arizona. If you count his kids and his grandkids, and we're talking 5th and 6th generation. So once again, we're talking to a generational farm and ranch family here in the state of Arizona on the topic of the future of Arizona agriculture. So Mark, I know you have a crystal ball, but if it's like mine, it's probably cracked a little bit. What do you see for the future of Arizona agriculture? The question I've been asking all of you in these past 5 or 6 times that I've interviewed on that. So what's your take?
Well, it depends.
Okay.
It really depends.
Yeah.
First of all, I think Arizona's biggest challenge, and I think the challenge is nationally, we do not have a farm preservation policy in this state. There's nothing being done at the governor's level, the legislative level, to preserve agriculture. Aside and apart from the property tax structure that we have, that was developed clear back in the 70s, there's nothing that the policymakers are even discussing on how to promote and protect agriculture in Arizona.
So explain what that means for the uninformed, for myself. Like, what exactly do you mean by farm preservation?
Sure.
It's obvious,
right,
but...
Right. The challenge we have, and most of the farmers in Maricopa County have faced this, is the growth that we've created in Arizona, all of the home building and business, which is good, but it has taken up a lot of our best farmland. Okay. Yeah. But the reason it has is because farm families got tired of starving to death, and a developer would come along and offer more money than they'd ever had before. They could pay off their debts and then go on and buy another farm further out or another dairy. And that's kind of what has happened. So going back in the history a little bit of Arizona, back in the 60s, middle 60s, there was a distinct decision made by the legislature to encourage growth in Arizona. And that was based on the fact that we were able to get the Central Arizona Project. Now, my grandfather worked on that. He was the secretary of the Interstate Streams Commission here in Arizona and helped lobby the CAP through Congress. In fact, he ran the legal office in San Francisco when Arizona sued California and Arizona over the water allocation in the Colorado River. Arizona was successful in getting our allocation, and that event back in '68 created the opportunity for Arizona to start to grow with that assurance of that water. And so the policy in the legislature was figure out how to keep housing inexpensive, attract business, keep your tax base low. But there was never any discussion about the transition that occurs when you convert ag lands to urban development. Okay?
Interesting.
And so Maricopa County at one time was probably one of the most productive agricultural counties in America. And so we've seen that transition now. Has that been bad? Well, it depends on which side of the fence you're on. So the real question now is, how much more agriculture land in Arizona do we want to lose to housing? Okay. Should the cities be changing their development practices to going vertical instead of horizontal? Okay. And is there anything that the legislature could do to help keep farmland in production? Now, but the big challenge you have in that is you can't force people to continue to run money-losing operations.
Yeah.
Okay? And so we've seen in the last decade a huge amount of family-owned farming operations leave, sell out to bigger organizations, sell to developers. because they're tired of starving to death. In fact, in the Kiplinger letter, it says this year we're looking at a 25% reduction in farm income nationally.
Yeah.
And last year was a record low.
Right.
As expenses go up. And so the dilemma that we face in America.
We've been reporting those numbers,
Yep.
by the way, in Arizona Agriculture, Arizona Farm Bureau's
Right.
publication.
And
Yeah.
so the dilemma we're facing in America is there's nothing that we're doing aside from some of the farm programs to figure out how we keep our food production, our fiber production safe from totally losing it.
Right.
Okay. And so in my opinion, this is a huge issue because Arizona's agriculture plays such an important role in food security.
Yeah. Is most of it too, if we did it right, designed to incentivize a family to keep it? Because we certainly don't want to take away someone's right to do with their property what they want to do.
Exactly.
Right?
So some of the concepts out there are through the land trust are buying the development rights or doing conservation easements on the property for 50, 75 years. And in effect, what you do is you buy from the farmer rancher the development rights. They can then take that money and pay off their debts, go in and buy another farm or ranch somewhere, keeps them on the land, keep it protected, and you keep the open space. Okay. And so that has a lot of, I think, goodness to it. It doesn't restrict them from selling their property. It just says you're not going to build houses on it for the next 40 or 50 years.
Sure.
But we're buying your right to do that.
Okay.
So you're compensating the people. So you're not violating their property rights, which is incredibly important.
Right. So coming full circle, and I actually feel convinced that should be something that we consider as well too. So your response was, it depends. But let's say that doesn't happen.
Okay, so if Arizona and the national government does not develop a farm preservation policy, then we're going to, over the next 50 to 100 years, we're going to lose our agricultural base. And if we lose our agricultural base, that will have a direct impact on our liberty and freedom. And let me explain that. Mm-hmm. If you go around the world and see the countries that struggle the most, they're the ones that cannot provide for themselves. They can't feed themselves. They're dependent on other countries. And when you become dependent on other countries for your fuel, your oil, your food, you set yourself up for a dangerous situation. You go back and look at the oil embargoes that we went through in this country. Okay. If we became dependent on Russia, China, Brazil, Mexico, other states, Venezuela for our food, okay, so they don't
Which is sort of kind of a joke because so many of the countries you just named have a complete opposite framework for how they run their countries. Well,
they're socialist countries, but more importantly, they don't have the food safety standards that we have in this country.
Yeah.
And so the quickest way to lose your liberty and freedom is take away your ability to feed yourself.
Yeah.
So from a national security standpoint, I cannot believe that the Congress and our legislature and governor have not figured this out. And to me, it's incredibly important because the ability to feed yourself is critical to your survival.
Right.
So it's what I call it's a national security issue. You can build all the missiles and tanks, computers, cell phones, but you can't eat those. Now, during COVID, we saw what happened when the grocery stores ran out of things. People panicked. And
wasn't it ironic that the most popular item that went the quickest was toilet paper?
Yeah. And so I just don't think the country should let its guard down. Now, let's get back to Arizona. Why does Arizona play an important role? We grow things here year-round. Okay, a lot of states can't. In the winter, many of the farm states just shut down. They can't grow anything.
Right.
We grow alfalfa 12 months a year. We grow vegetables. We grow nuts, fruits, citrus. We have some of the most advanced dairies in the world right here in Arizona. Our environment and our soils are such that the products we produce are the best in the world. In fact, there were studies done on the soil in Yuma that showed that the Yuma soil was the best soil for growing vegetables anywhere in the world.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yes. And so you look at that, and so these urban folks, our attorney general, others who are seemingly anti-agriculture, and well, let's take the water away from the farmers. No, I don't think they understand how critical Arizona plays a role in that. And yes, we're a desert, but that desert soil, when irrigated, is very productive.
Yeah.
And we have the year-round growing season.
I love what my U of A professors say about that. And now I've kind of glommed onto that point. It's exactly because we are a desert state that we need to be growing alfalfa, that we need to be growing the fruits and vegetables. What we do in Yuma in the winter in the United States cannot be picked up and replicated anywhere else in the country.
That's exactly right.
Because they simply cannot do it in the Midwest. You can't even do it in California. And I like to speak of the, just got an interview on KTAR today, the pendulum swing of the leafy greens. So right now it's going to shift back to California,
right.
Because the cooler, it's cooler in the summer in California, but it will come right back here in the winter because it has to. So very good point, Mark, and I appreciate that.
So let me
Go
add
ahead.
one thing to it. So your typical urban person walks in the grocery store and they see 60,000 items. The American public in the last 100 years has not wanted for anything. Agriculture has been so productive. And a lot of the urban folks are 2 and 3 and 4 generations away from dirt. They don't know where their food comes from. They don't care. And so your public policy folks, what are they focusing on? Encouraging business to come here, which is good, the high-paying jobs. We want that, the building. But agriculture is being completely left out of the discussion to our own peril.
And kind of pushed in the corner. Pausing for what I like to say is station identification. This is Julie Murphy with Arizona Farm Bureau for Talk to a Farmer. Today, Mark Killian is our, as I've been labeling you guys, Aggie Futurists, because we're still on the series about what will the future of agriculture be in this wonderful desert state of Arizona. So you maybe have already answered this second part. Second question is, it seems like it's all the most pressing. What do you see as the most pressing issue in ag besides water policy, besides what you were talking about with preservation, farm preservation laws? Is there anything else that stands second to you besides that?
Well, I think the transition from generation to generation is a critical issue. And I know they have changed the inheritance tax laws, but as far as I'm concerned, there shouldn't be any inheritance tax at all.
I agree.
That's robbing the grave. And it creates a pocket industry with lawyers and accountants on trying to figure out how to maneuver the tax laws so that you can pass from one generation to the next. I think as a part of that too, trying to keep our kids on the farms and the ranches is very difficult because of the low income, and they've seen their parents struggle. And to tell you the truth, they look at it and say, hey, I don't want to live in poverty.
Right.
Okay. Now, there are some exceptions out there. There are some farms that have diversified in all kinds of different kind of crops.
You guys have.
Yeah, yes. And by doing that, that makes it possible for the enterprise to go on like Brian Rose. He's growing roses everywhere, okay? A lot of people don't consider that agriculture, but it is. He's growing roses, and they go all over the country, okay? And you've got Arnold Duncan that's got his deal going on. You've got, the folks up in Dewey.
Mortimer's for the Mortimer Farms.
Okay. You got what the Sossmans are doing and what the Schneffs have done.
Yep.
And so, in my opinion, for a lot of farm families to survive, they've got to get out of the monoculture and figure out crops that they can grow that diversify their market so that they're not just tied to cotton or alfalfa. That there's things that they can get into.
We're speaking of that generational transition just because that was when you landed on allowing that young vibrant, creative young person to say, Dad, Mom, I do want to farm. You're willing to help me with this, but we need to do X, Y, Z. And sometimes they're the ones that come up with a lot of these amazing innovations. They may take a portion of the farm and turn it into an agritainment. John Post from Marana Pumpkin
Right,
Patch,
exactly.
same thing. He's still doing some very traditional farming, but he sees this transition partly with the agritainment, where we're allowing our urban buddies to come onto the farm and to see what it's like. Of course, they're enjoying the best of the best when it comes to that kind of thing, and they're maybe not seeing the slog and the hot days and,
right,
chopping weeds in the field and all that stuff. So now I'm going to pivot to you were the former director of the Arizona Department of Agriculture. Actually, former director means present tense, and you have the perspective of that bird's eye view on the state's agriculture. I mean, the role of the Department of Ag is very important. That department is ensuring the safety and efficacy and the flow of our agriculture here in the state. So what would you tell all stakeholders, regardless of where they're coming from? Maybe it's somebody in the legislature that knows nothing about Arizona agriculture. What would you tell these stakeholders in the industry to do to prepare for the future, or to set their focus on what?
Well, I think from a perspective of the department, you see a diverse agriculture, and you see how people struggle and what they do. And I think from that standpoint, encouraging agriculturalists to diversify, figure out how to operate with as little amount of debt as possible, find out what grants and aids are out there from the federal government, be actively pushing the legislature and Congress to put more money into farm programs to help the farmers keep going. And you run into this argument, well, what about all these small businesses on Main Street? Why can't they get help? Well, they're not producing anything that feeds anybody. That's my argument. Okay. All right. I mean, yeah, it's important they do a product, but if their business went away, you wouldn't starve to death. And so, and I know that makes some people mad, but I think you have to look at it in that perspective. And so from the department's perspective, the department has been underutilized by the legislature and the governors for way too long. We were successful in finally getting the pay increase for our employees. In some cases, our employees were anywhere from 25 to 45% under market on their pay.
Wow.
And our turnover rate in the department was as high as 65% in some areas. And yet here, this department is responsible for food safety, for the movement of all livestock in the state, for zoonotic diseases, keeping bad bugs and stuff out of our state that impacts people, and the products that they get at the grocery store, the weights and measures to make sure you're not getting ripped off. So the Department of Agriculture does so many things to keep the public safe. But my frustration was that we could never get any recognition from the legislature or the governor's office to that fact that the Department of Agriculture is a health and safety organization. And it needs more resources and it needs more people so that it can continue its mission. We have been very fortunate in Arizona that we have not had a major outbreak of anything other than what happened with the E. coli in 2018. And out of that...
which they've never really come to the conclusion.
That's correct. And that was the federal... Right.
Yeah.
The federal government didn't respond in time.
Yeah.
And it was through our work that we were finally able to get them to let us have a rapid response team in our own department to get get on the scene and do that. That was something that I recommended that USDA let us do, and FDA, and finally they agreed to it. But again, the department plays an incredibly important role, and it's a great resource. They're dedicated employees, but the department has the same thing that the ag community has. We have a bunch of old people. I use that guardedly, that have been with the state for many, many years, and they're coming up on retirement. and trying to find people to come in and take their shoes is going to be a critical effort. And so Paul's going to have a real challenge trying to figure out who are the next generation of employees who can step in and fill the shoes of Jack Peterson and Susan Chase.
And they're amazing
Vince.
people,
Oh, they're
but they
awesome.
have to someday
Right.
retire.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's a challenge. But again, going back and overlooking Arizona's agriculture, it's diverse, it's awesome, it's great. There's innovators out there, and I just hope that the policymakers will understand that. And you go back, look at what we've done in the dairy industry in our state, how that has dramatically changed the technology there. You look at the technology down in Yuma that they use now in planting vegetables, and the robots and the drones and all this stuff, which gets me into my role when I was on the Board of Regents. The universities play such a key role in helping agriculture. Mm-hmm. If you go back in our history and look at how what was going on in American agriculture at the Dust Bowl, coming out of the Dust Bowl, the universities recognized that they needed to do more to help agriculture. And that research is what revolutionized our productivity in America, in saving our soils and changing our crops. And I think the universities working with the various ag groups, there's technology out there I don't think we've discovered yet. I think there are strains of plants that have not been yet developed yet that'll use less water. I think there are, I don't think we can even fathom the technology that we will have in the next 25 to 30 years that will directly impact agriculture's production, its productivity, its ability to use less water, ability to use less chemicals, produce better plants, stronger plants, more healthy plants for the consumer. So I hope the universities, particularly in Arizona, that the policymakers will encourage them to work closely with agriculture and solving those problems.
I'm adding a question to your list because you know Paul, and Paul knows you. Mm-hmm. Paul Brierly, you mentioned him. He's the current director for the Department of Ag. If there's one piece of advice that you'd give him, especially since the two of you know each other, he came from the Yuma Ag Center and is taken on this pretty important role. It was certainly important when you were in his shoes. So any counsel?
Well, I've talked to Paul a number of times, and he's perfectly capable of figuring all that out. But from my perspective, the department still has not recovered from the cuts that were done in 2008. Okay. And I'll give you an example. Let's Weights and Measures. Weights and Measures used to have 35 investigators. Today, I think they got 14. Mm-hmm. And they have to check every cash register in this state, every scale in this state. They check every gas pump in this state for the crooks that try and steal our credit cards and all that stuff. They check the fuel. Any kind of packaging where they go in and make sure that, let's say they're on the store shelf, it says it's a 5-pound box of Bisquick. They open that up and make sure there's 5 pounds of Bisquick, not 5 pounds of air. Okay? They check to make sure all the pricing is correct on the store shelves.
So I would take it then that they're constantly traveling?
They are trying to keep up.
Yeah.
Okay? Jack Peterson's group, the Environmental Services Division, they used to have quite a few more people. He's way down. I think he's got 6 or 7 now. Plant Services used to have 120, and I think they're down around 42, 45. The livestock inspectors, at one time, there was 80 some odd livestock inspectors in this state, and I think we're still down to around 18 or 20, something like that.
So how have they compensated for that?
Well,
for not getting...
We've been blessed because our employees work so hard.
Okay.
And we have employees. Still. Yeah. And so, but still, the demands are there. They do the best they can. And part of that is, we keep commerce moving. Okay. And because we have to inspect a lot of those plants that go out of the state and whatever. And so, let's talk about, Nogales. We've got over 100 inspectors down there just inspecting produce that comes out of Mexico. and that's grown over time too. So I guess what I'd say to Paul is keep hounding the legislature and governor's office to put the resources into the department so that we can meet the demand of our consuming public and the agriculture community.
Yeah. And I, in his list of priorities that he shared, it because he's crisscrossing the state just like you had to when you were there, that's certainly a priority comment on his part.
Yeah.
So you're underpinning his concerns, and that's good. So considering all these challenges, we've got two more questions. How hopeful are you about what we face? We just got done talking about a lot of the employee challenge, not enough employees for the Department of Ag.
Well, look, for agriculture in general, I'm hopeful that the policymakers will come to the realization that they have to support agriculture. And I hope there's not some major catastrophe that happens that wakes people up. Okay?
Yeah.
And the problem we have in our country is generally the Congress and the legislatures usually only react to when it's a headline. Now, when I was in the legislature, that was one of the problems you had. What's the latest fad issue? Well, it's because the Arizona Republic would raise an issue or it'd be on the front page and everybody'd run to solve that problem. In the meantime, all these other important things were left in the dust and not paid attention to. So I think to a large degree, I'm hopeful that things will get better. I think a lot depends. Now I'm going to get political here. Be careful. A lot depends on what happens in the election this fall.
Sure.
Okay?
Yeah.
And right now we have an administration that is clearly, in my opinion, anti-agriculture. They side with the radical environmentalists. And I could go down the list of those environmental issues that negatively impact agriculture and ability to feed ourselves that need to be changed. The whole fossil fuel thing, electric vehicle. You just start get into that, and there's some real challenges. But again, my hope gets to the very individuals that farm and ranch. You have to have a pretty tough skin. You're a risk taker. I mean, you could take your money and go to Las Vegas and probably win more than you would when you farm and ranch. But most people that are in farming and ranching, they do it because they love it.
Right.
It's a disease.
It is a disease.
It's in your DNA, and you love doing that. And you would find that those individuals who lose their farms, who lose that ability, go through a very, very difficult transition in their lives.
It is. It's very tough for families.
And it is. So my hope is that we'll continue to go. But again, my hope is in somehow we in agriculture have got to convince the policymakers to bring Arizona agriculture to the same level as all these high-tech firms. Okay?
Right.
We want those jobs. That's great. We got to feed people. And where are you gonna grow the crops?
Yeah, I agree with you. This is Julie Murphy interviewing Mark Killian for the Future of Arizona Agriculture for our Talk to a Farmer. We've gone all over the state. This is probably going to end up being an 8-part series. Our last interview will be in May with Dean Burgess, who is the Dean of the College of Ag at the University of Arizona, our land-grant university. It's been a very interesting interview process with everyone on this very important issue. If no industry is as critical as agriculture, because if we can't eat, we can't clothe ourselves, we can't live. So I've been very appreciative of everybody. And I'm going to ask you the water question, and you're going to dive into, the metaphor intended, a lot of history behind our legislation on that, which will be really interesting. But Joel, are we looking good? Has anybody posted any comments or questions?
There was one comment saying, thanks for your support of 4-H.
Oh, okay. Of course. I bet it's one of our colleagues in 4-H because Arizona Farm Bureau does sponsor 4-H. In fact, we're very supportive of a lot of our ag-related youth programs, both 4-H and FFA. So uh, on behalf of Arizona Farm Bureau, I will say you are welcome. So as we continue, as we wrap this up on water, I know we can see a positive way forward because we persevere in the most challenging of times, and this certainly legislative year is one of those challenging times with water. But you had said that it might be good for us to have a little bit of a historical perspective so we understand present day conditions. So give me the lowdown, Mark Killian.
Well, I think I could go back to my grandfather's generation. That they went through there was a huge drought back in the 30s, and some of the reservoirs were pretty much empty. And it was at that point that they began to realize that they needed to bring water from outside. And that's when the group got together, the Interstate Streams Commission, and developed the whole idea of the CAP. And it took time. The lawsuits, the lawsuit I think was in 58 or 59. In fact, I was a little boy when my family took me over to see Grandma and Grandpa in San Francisco. He set up the office for the lawsuit. In fact,
Wow.
They took all the records and files in our farm truck and drove it up to San Francisco.
Oh, wow.
And Grandpa had the office there, and it's an interesting story. Then he and Grandma moved back to D.C., and he helped lobby the CAP through Congress. And he worked with John Rhodes and Morris Udall in helping them do what they needed to do, compromise, whatever, on getting the votes required to get the CAP. And so,
huge project.
Oh, it was huge, and it changed the face of Arizona.
How many miles of cemented canal? Something like 250, 300?
At least.
I know they'll correct me if somebody's watching this live, but a lot.
Well, the funny thing is, Grandpa told me that originally he went down to Tucson to talk to the city fathers in Tucson to see if they wanted to participate. They said, "We don't want your water." Well, that changed about 25 years later. They all said, "Oh no, we need the water." So, but coming out of that, to get the final appropriations on the CAP, the Interior Secretary told Arizona, "You have got to create a Water Management Act." And so in 1980, Governor Babbitt and Stan Turley and Burton Barr and all those guys, they got together and created the Groundwater Act of 1980, which set up the conservation methods. No other state had ever done that. And Arizona was the leader in that. Even California to this day has not done what Arizona did. And after the groundwater code was established and set up the AMAs and the transfer basins and all that, then the big issue then became, we discovered after 1980, there were some problems with the quality of the water underground. It was being polluted from various different things. And so in 84, 85, we passed the Groundwater Quality Act, which created all kinds of protections for our underground water.
Wow.
It was a landmark piece of legislation. Then after that...
And this was all at the state level.
It was at the state level, that's correct. And then going into the 90s, Nevada and California were trying to steal our allocation of the CAP because we weren't using it all. So the folks came to me, I was Speaker of the House at the time, and folks came to me and said, "Mark, would you run the Groundwater Banking Act?" So I sponsored the bill, and that allowed us to take our full allocation of CAP water and pump it in the ground. And that way, California and Nevada couldn't steal our water. Okay?
Yeah.
And that was critical, and that brought Nevada really to its knees. And so Rita McGuire was the one that really helped me with that, and we were able to get that done. And so the point of all that is that when Arizona has needed to really get after the water issue, we've shown the ability to do that. But what we have done is we've had the governor, the speaker, the president, the chairmans of the agriculture community, the natural resources community, the stakeholders get in a room and work that stuff out, and don't come out until you have an agreement.
Mm-hmm.
And my pitch is talking through press releases and it doesn't get the job done. And so I'm hopeful the legislature, particularly with the current issues that we're talking about right now, will be able to hammer something out. People are way far apart, and water is something you always fight over. But I think people with good intentions can figure out how we can preserve our water. Now, having said that, we sit on a pile of water over in Harquahela. There are 3 Lake Meads worth of water under that land.
Really? And geologists are telling us that, correct?
Yes, that's correct. And so that's one of the transfer basins under the 1980 Groundwater Act. We left those, there were 3 basins we left open so you could transfer that water for anywhere in the state you wanted to. Okay?
Which means they're not under an AMA or an
That's
INA.
correct. That's correct.
Right.
So
okay.
whether it was done on purpose or that's just the way they did it in 1980, it turned out to be, it's a huge bank of water. And so I'm hopeful the policymakers will understand that and figure out a way to use that water to the benefit of the cities and agriculture and other people.
And that's in the Mojave area.
That's over in, you just go beyond the nuclear power plant and just keep going. Harquahela is just like you're going to LA.
Okay.
So it's over there. It's just off the freeway. So
going back to the water bank legislation in the 1990s that you just mentioned, and that's so cool. I didn't know that you were Speaker of the House at the time. So then I have been told, because of that legislation, and we've been banking that water, that's our allocation that was allocated to us. If we didn't use it all, we banked it. That we have, like, is this true that we have something like a 30-year supply if we didn't have any more of that banking going on? Or in other words, a real solid supply that can last a long time. We're in actually a better state, I've been told, than like Atlanta, Georgia, that if they don't get their 40 and 50 inches of rain in the year, they would be in serious trouble.
Right. I don't know how much of a supply it is.
Okay.
Really. I don't know the current numbers, but I do know that by bringing the CAP water in, there was less groundwater pumping.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in many areas, the groundwater level came up. It's come up.
That's happened in Pinal County, and why some irrigation districts that were solely dependent on CAP water no longer have it available because they were in that.
Right.
They have converted back to the groundwater because those tables have gone up.
That's where our farm is, in Pinal County, and
right.
they've had to go in and drill some more wells.
Right.
And they'll start using the groundwater. And so, and then that's a whole nother issue in the allocation of the CAP and who got what and where and when. And, we're dependent on Wyoming and Colorado and Utah to have snow. And hopefully, the weather patterns will be such that in the next few years we'll get a lot more snow and rain, and that'll help solve the problem.
One of our farmers feels like we're going into, he says, Julie, I think we're going into a wet period. He goes, of course, I may be more hopeful than not, but there's always these cycles, and sometimes a wet period and or a drought period. He said, we've had the mega drought of 20 plus, 22 plus years. So he goes, maybe that's more hope than calculation on my part, but he is a math teacher. He was a former math teacher, went into farming. So what's your take on that?
Well, I remember in '83 when we had the massive flood. Okay.
Yeah.
And the only way you could get across the Salt River was the Tempe Bridge. Okay.
That's true. That's
and
right.
The Salt River was as wide as, and it, flooded everything, and the water went, wherever it went. And I remember as a kid back in the junior high in the late 60s, we had a real wet period, and the Salt River flooded and all that. And you couldn't go up the Beeline to Payson. And so I think the weather always changes, and I'm sure over time maybe we're drier than we used to be 100 years or 200 years ago. But the bottom line is when we have these wet periods, if we're smart enough with our technology to capture this water and put it back in the ground, okay, And, when I see all that water going down the Salt River, sometimes I think, why aren't we building retention basins to hold on to that water? And instead of just letting it go,
So I want to get back to, you said the equivalent of 2 to 3 lake meads under the Harquahala.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe some of those aquifers are pretty deep, and the deeper you have to go with the well, the more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of some of the complaints with someone that maybe buys land. It's happened a lot in Cochise County. They buy some land, they don't investigate water well conditions and all that stuff, and oops, somebody next door has a deeper straw than theirs, and they get upset. How do we resolve those kind of things?
It's very simple. The legislature needs to appropriate a fund to help those people. Okay. It's just like the underground trust fund that we created to help the old service stations that had those tanks underground for the gasoline, and they leaked, and they had to take those all out. There was a fund created to help them be able to do that.
Okay.
We should do the same thing for those. We should have a fund set aside to help those small property owners and homeowners, and the state ought to pay for their new wells. Drill as deep as you need to and pay for it.
Yeah. And then I have also heard that some of the larger farms that can afford the deeper wells had offered to help in some ways, but some of that was, I guess, the politics involved. Some of that was refused by some of the locals. And the challenge of this, I hate to even bring up this metaphor because it's probably way overused, but whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting. But it's sort of kind of true.
Well, see, the challenge we face is that in agriculture all over the world, we share our local water with the world. Every product we grow uses local water, but we ship it. Our cotton goes wherever, our citrus goes wherever, our alfalfa goes to China or India or Saudi Arabia. Okay. But you know what? I was in Safeway the other day, and I saw the most beautiful gold bell pepper, and I went up, and the little sticker on it said grown in Holland. So Holland is using their water to ship to Mesa, Arizona for...
Right.
And so people, they're all upset about Fondamonte and them pumping all that water and growing all that alfalfa. But there's an awful lot of other farmers that sell alfalfa to Fondamonte or other exports, and our Arizona water goes everywhere.
And I think some of that's a misnomer, and it's certainly a perfect soundbite for the pants on fire, hair on fire type of tone that we get in the media, exporting our water to Saudi Arabia. So if you literally want to look at the water content that's in a bale of hay, and you as alfalfa farmers have to be real careful about that because you don't want it to be too much. You don't want, but it's like in the single percentage points, right? It's like 4 or 5%. The water cycle is the water cycle. A lot of our alfalfa will, and I just learned this from my U of A professors, in essence, banks water because most alfalfa stays in the field easily 3 to 4 years. The roots are so deep that it knows how to draw water from 12 feet down. So you've got, and then if some of that water is being pushed back down and into the aquifer because alfalfa plant doesn't need to use it all, it's a very efficient legume, right? For using water. And yet none of that is seen because we've lost our sense of science and technology and literally what the hydrological cycle is all about. We're not exporting our water to Saudi Arabia.
So here's the challenge you have, and I'm going to pick on our Attorney General. Okay. She didn't know what she's talking about.
I don't think she's watching Talk to a Farmer Friday anyway.
But she doesn't. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She doesn't understand the farming cycle. The danger of what she's done with Fondamonte, and it's an easy soundbite to say, well, we don't want to ship our water to Saudi Arabia. Well, and anybody that has a state lease that's growing alfalfa, well, we're going to take it away from them. Well, no, wait a minute. Some of that alfalfa is grown is used right here in the valley. All these people own horses and goats and chickens and pigs, and we sell a lot of that alfalfa locally. And yeah, we export it, and the water's in our vegetables. And I don't think she understands that is the water cycle. And in my opinion, it's a dangerous trend to pick one crop and say, you can't grow that crop.
It sets a precedent for
Yes.
other things, and maybe
Yes.
that's not her intent.
So the challenge is, okay, if you're worried about the water use, then go back and look at the technology they use in order to grow those crops.
Right.
And the things that they use now, the soil testing and that they do in the probes, instead of irrigating every 7 days or every 10 days, it depends on the water content in the soil.
Right.
And so in many cases, you're using a lot less water based on the technology of irrigation.
Right. And some of my other farmers that farm in that same area and know that farm said, Julie, since your previous farm owner, mainly because of technology, not because of the failure of the farm before them, but Fondamonte has improved their technology and reduced water use by 40% is what his estimate. Now it's an estimate, but just based on his knowledge of the growing area. And we're not trying to make a defense of anybody, but they're registered with the Secretary of State. They are registered as a business, you know. So sometimes I wonder, and not to point fingers at anyone or anything, it could be whether it was this current Attorney General or the previous one. Sometimes you wonder if it's just a straw man.
Well, it's easy in politics to find a straw man or to, there's a boogeyman and they're doing something and attack it and use that, and that's kind of sad. And I think, you know, those kind of statistics that show that they're 40% more efficient. I mean, the previous farmer, I think it was John Vanderway, he didn't have the capital that this group had. And so they were able to come in and put in those circle pivots, and they were able to do all kinds of technological advances. In fact, the Saudis have been on the forefront. The Saudis and the Israelis have been on the forefront of water technology because they live in the desert like we do.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of those technologies that we use and we can better use in our efforts.
We also have to look at what, again, a separate issue if we are concerned about foreigners owning American land, but that's a separate issue. It's not about the farming.
Right.
But if you look at what they're doing with their alfalfa, they're shipping it to Saudi Arabia. It's feeding their dairy cattle, and now they have dairy products. They're feeding their population, and to me, that's an aspirational thing that every country needs to be committed to. Going back to your original point, farming is a security issue as much as it is a food safety issue.
And my understanding is a lot of that food doesn't just stay in Saudi Arabia; it goes into Africa to feed people who are in desperate needs.
Yeah.
And so now, you know, again, going back to the pumping of water, if we need to regulate that more, then that gets back to the current legislation. Go and meter those wells, use technology to figure out how we can have plants use less water. And that gets back to universities. Is there research going on? Are they developing alfalfa plants that don't need quite as much water?
Right.
Okay, cool. Let's do that. Can you get a plant that uses less water but is more productive? I mean, our GMOs, which I know it's a commie plot.
We talk about it at Farm Bureau, so you're okay.
So, but genetically modifying crops helps us make agriculture more efficient.
Right. We reduce land use while we've globally only increased 10% of our land to farming, and this is globally, it's not the United States. We keep losing our farmland, but something like an increase of 300% in food production, and most of that is because of the seed technology.
Exactly.
And AKA GMOs.
Yeah.
Mark Killian, this has been a fantastic interview, and it's encouraging. All of you have encouraged me that we need to be persistent and persevere, but we can be hopeful about agriculture in the state of Arizona because we do it so well. So thank you. And for those of you that were listening not live, thanks for joining us and watching this video later. Just know that we also will upload it to our website at Arizona Farm Bureau, or otherwise known as azfb.org. Thanks again, and see you next Friday for Talk to a Farmer Friday.